virtual experiences. I'm Jerry Milani, and a little early this morning, but we hope you've gotten up early and joined us here for what I think is going to be a really enjoyable panel. I think you guys will have a lot of fun with this, especially if you're a basketball fan, a sports fan, but if you're just a fan of good writing, I think you're going to love this too. Let's just give you a quick update on some of the other Wizard World virtual experiences we have coming up in the next few days. In fact, a little bit later today, 1 o'clock Eastern time, we're going to have the writer and developer of the Ari and the Secret of Seasons video game, Janice Davis and Sebastian Latouze. They're going to be on with me at about 1 o'clock, so enjoy that one if you're a video game fan. Tomorrow, we have Back to the Future. We have two stars of the trilogy, Claudia Wells and James Tolkien, 89-year-old James Tolkien. So looking forward to speaking with those folks tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern. Thursday, we have Legends of Rock and Roll, including Mary Wilson, CJ, and Richie Ramone are among the folks who are going to be part of that panel Thursday at 4 o'clock Eastern. And Friday at 1 o'clock, you might remember this movie from the 70s, Escape to Witch Mountain. We're going to have two of the child stars all grown up in that coming up on Friday. So whether you're watching now on Twitch or Facebook or YouTube, go ahead into the chat room. And if you have any questions, be sure to ask those in the chat room. And we'll get to as many of those as we can in the next 40 minutes or so while we have our guest on today. And also check out Wizard World Virtual for all those upcoming events and ways that you can participate in addition to the live Q&As. Also, Wizard World Vault. We have 20 plus years of pop culture experience that Wizard World has put into the Wizard World Vault. There's great memorabilia, great things that you can look through there and just pick out your favorites as we continue on the Wizard World experience, which now has gone virtual since we haven't been able to do a live show in quite a while, but we're excited to be able to bring these kind of events to you here in your living room. And today, a little bit different. You know, we're doing everything we can do that we'd normally have at a Wizard World show. So yes, we have celebrities, and yes, we have artists. We also have authors. We have cosplayers, all those things. We're bringing those to you. And today we have the opportunity, this best-selling author, he's a sports journalist. He hosts the great Two Writers Slinging Yang podcast. I know I get that wrong. He's a sports writer at Sports Illustrated, senior writer. He was at ESPN, lots of other places. He wrote numerous books. They include The Bad Guys 1, which is about the 1986 Mets. We have some 86 Mets fans here that would probably enjoy that. Gunslinger about Brett Favre. I'm a Packers fan and still love the book. Football for a Buck, which is my personal favorite of his. It's about the USFL football experience from the 1980s. And about to be published. I believe it's on Tuesday that it comes out, and that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today. You see it behind me, Ring Circus. It's about the Kobe, Shaq, Phil Lakers. Also one of the most accomplished products of the University of Delaware cross-country program. Here is the great Jeff Pearlman. Jeff.
Hey, I would not say I'm one of the great products of the University of Delaware cross-country program.
Because one of the most accomplished products. You may not have been one of the best runners, but you're one of the most accomplished people to have competed in cross-country at University of Delaware. Yes?
I mean, a writer any more accomplished than a dentist or a doctor? I don't know, but
we don't know. We don't know. Jeff, thanks for getting up early and being with us today. I know you've got a lot going on with a book coming out in a couple of days. I want to start with, you know, you're writing the book in 2018, 2019. You get probably most of it done, I would say, and you wake up on January 26th of this year, and you learn of the tragedy of Kobe Bryant. What are your initial thoughts on it, first as a human, and then second, as I've got this book coming out in a few months and my protagonist it dies tragically?
Well, I was sitting in a coffee shop and a friend of mine named Amy Bass texted me and said it was something like, Kobe Bryant reportedly dead. And it actually, in hindsight, kind of reminded me of when I was a kid and the Challenger exploded, the space shuttle exploded, where you hear news and it doesn't actually make sense to you. Like, it doesn't make sense to you. It doesn't register, you know, like that doesn't make sense. And as I read more and more about it, it was just beyond crushing and beyond heartbreaking. I live out here in Southern California, and the impact that Kobe Bryant has had on people is just enormous. And not just as a basketball player, but sort of the idea of work ethic and finding a goal, putting a goal out there and going for it. So personally, it was crushing. And someone that day actually said to me, so this is good for your book, right? And I was like, I don't even want to, that's no, don't care. Like, don't care. So after you get past that a little bit, the book is done. I mean, it's done. And I was sort of talking with my editor, and we agreed I would write just a short, because the book was done, but they would insert a short, like 3-page author's note. And the point I thought it was important to make was that the Kobe Bryant you're reading about in this book, which is 1996 to 04, was sort of young, and it could be a pain in the butt, and he was difficult and ornery and blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't the guy at 41 who died. The dad, the quote unquote girl dad with the 4 daughters, and the daughter Gianna who died with him. And there's just a different person, and that this should definitely be read as a developmental part of Kobe Bryant's life, not as the finished product. So that I really wanted to emphasize that point.
Yeah, and you bring up my next question, which is, if you read this book and didn't know what happened after with Kobe, even just as a person, how did he change his life? You would have a very different impression of Kobe Bryant if you didn't have that kind of knowledge of the 4 years after. What changed? What made him be the kind of figure he became?
I think a lot of it, and this happens with so many athletes, high level athletes, is they become mortal. Toward the end of his career, he got hurt and he came back, and he wasn't the same player because you get old, and he didn't have the spring in his legs, and he wasn't as explosive, and he wasn't as dangerous. And he started seeing it and admitting it and talking about it. And instead of talking about how great he was and thinking about how great he was, it was about survival and also about sort of helping younger players along. And he started being on some really bad Laker teams. I think that was incredibly important to him and to who he became. And that's when your priorities start to shift with athletes, where all of a sudden you are a dad of kids, and there are more important things, and your team stinks, and you're struggling to beat the Grizzlies, and like, you just you change, you really change. And I think losing his ability forced him to change, having kids forced him to change, then leaving the sport forced him to change. And he just became a much more relatable human being as that happened to him.
The dynamic of this Kobe Shaq, Phil, I mean, there are other teams in history that we know about, maybe the early 70s A's, the late 70s Yankees, that clashed, but they made it work. What made Kobe, Shaq, Phil work, even though there were times when none of the three of them got along with each other?
Well, it's not a super sexy answer, but the number one thing is talent. Like, Shaq and Kobe were 2 of the top 5 players in the NBA playing on the same team at the same time, and they didn't play the same position, which helped. Number 2, if you look at those teams, they really surrounded them with perfect pieces. They basically took Shaq, took Kobe, had a great coach in Phil, and then they would, here's Rick Fox over here, here's Brian Shaw over here, here's Debbie and George over there. They just really sort of filled in the pieces nicely, and they had these 2 uber talented players at the same time who knew. I mean, people forget, because Kobe ended up becoming a much sort of bigger name in a way. Shaquille O'Neal was an unstoppable NBA player. There was no defense for Shaquille O'Neal. If you threw 2 guys at him, he was going to beat it and oftentimes pass out of it. If you threw 3 guys at him, half the guys were going to be open. They had a dead-eye 3-point shooter in Robert Horry. Obviously, Kobe could create and find any shot he wanted. They were just better than you. And sometimes when another team is better than you, there's not that much you can do. They were just better, period.
Before I move to what happened later, let's step back, talking about teams that had a lot of talent and were just better. You wrote the book Showtime about the 80s Lakers about 5-6 years ago. What are the parallels between those Lakers teams and these Kobe Shaq Lakers teams? And how are they different? 2 different dynasties.
Yeah, I mean, they were very different. Obviously, they were both, singularly based on guard center, like the focus on both those teams. You had Kareem, you had Magic, you had Kobe, you had Shaq. You had excellent coaches in Phil and Pat Riley. And interestingly, in both circumstances, they were preceded by coaches who really struggled to get their teams respect. Pat Riley was preceded by Paul Westhead, who was not liked by players, and Magic called for his firing. Phil Jackson was preceded by Kurt Rambis as an interim coach, and Del Harrison. Both those people struggled to get the respect of their players as well. And again, the biggest thing they had is they were the most talented teams in the league. They both had just an insane amount of talent. I think the 80s Lakers had a little more widespread talent when you look at Worthy and Cooper and Byron Scott, but they both just were loaded with gifted young players in the
rated E10 for ages 10 and up.
And Byron Scott's the parallel.
I don't know what just happened.
A few years later, great.
And AC Green. Actually, there were a bunch of guys. AC Green played a little bit. Yeah, there were definitely some crossovers. Yeah.
And then Byron, you wrote in there supposed to be the mentor in a way for Kobe, and that kind of didn't work out. I think because Kobe didn't want a mentor, right?
Well, there's so many people throughout the book who are supposed to be Kobe Bryant's mentor, and sometimes it took a little bit. Like Derek Harper, the longtime guard, would take him out for dinner, and Jerry West really liked the way J.R. Reed, a journeyman forward, talked to him, and John Sally, John Sally, the longtime NBA player. One time, Kobe actually agreed to go out with him when they were in Miami, and he agreed to go out and go to South Beach. And John Sally was shocked and thrilled. Oh my God, Kobe's coming out. This is a great thing. And they're out, and it's like 9:30 at night. And Kobe's like, look, man, they're in a club. He's like, I got to go because I got to work out at 5 a.m. tomorrow, and I can't stay out. So it was very hard to be his mentor because he needed to find his own path.
We have some fans from Pennsylvania, from Reno, Nevada, from Wyckoff, New Jersey, who have checked in to say that they're watching. I have a comment from Joe Rizzo Baseball. He said a blue hen might run very fast if it was chased by, say, a Marist red fox. That's his comment from the Northeast colleges.
I did run against Marist. We ran against Marist in big meets. I'm sure I got my ass kicked by Marist. Yeah.
There you go. Well, I went to school at Fordham, and I went to school at North Rockland. I know you're a Mayapack person, so we have our little rivalries there. Some baseball. So Pumpkin Pie Addict asks, you said, Jeff, you mentioned that young Kobe's in the book, and how would you contrast Kobe through his career in terms of personality that's not in the book?
I mean, a lot of it had to do with it's weird. He comes out of college. He comes out of high school. He goes straight from Lower Merion to the NBA. And it's the same time Jermaine O'Neal actually also entered the NBA straight out of high school. Jermaine O'Neal went to the Portland Trailblazers. Kobe went to the Lakers. Jermaine O'Neal reports to the Trailblazers, and he's very quiet and very receptive to criticism. And if the coach wants to play him 3 minutes a game, that's totally fine, coach. I understand. Kobe shows up in his first training camp. When the players introduce themselves, he says, my name's Kobe Bryant. Nobody's going to punk me. He was really hardcore from the beginning. I'm going to be great. I'm going to be great. And if you don't think I'm going to be great, I'm going to kill you in practice. I'm just going to destroy you. And there's this long string of guys he just challenged in practice. And I need to destroy you. I need to destroy you. And my screen changed. Brought it up. And it's interesting. That did not change until late in his career. He was that guy. And if you look at the end of the dynasty, he was tired of being Shaq's number 2, and he was tired of playing with Shaq. He didn't enjoy Shaq. He thought Shaq was sort of lazy and a little indifferent and out of shape and never improved his free throw shooting and just kind of accepted who he was and didn't work harder. And Kobe always had that drive. So he changed at the end because he lost his skills a little bit, and he was surrounded by not very good players, and he saw the end coming and he got hurt. So he had vulnerabilities, and that actually impacts a guy. But throughout most of his career, definitely throughout the period I wrote about, he was the same hard-nosed, edgy, wanted to slit your throat basketball player.
Who do you think got more satisfaction after this dynasty? Shaq from when he won but without them in Miami, or Kobe and Phil winning 3 years later and starting their own kind of little mini dynasty again?
I think Shaq had the temporary joy of winning with Dwayne Wade, and that felt great. And then he did the rap where he kind of mocked Kobe and said, anyway. And but I think Kobe set it all in motion, right? So Kobe sets it all in motion. He will not play again under Phil. Of course, he ended up playing with Phil, but at that time, after 2004, Phil was not brought back. Shaq was traded. This is all the mechanisms of Kobe in a lot of ways. Kobe did not want the same work. He wanted to set his own course, and he got crushed for doing it. What are you doing? This is ridiculous. And the next season, they were not good. And they get, Caron Butler and Lamar Odom and Brian Grant in this trade. And doesn't seem like a good haul. So when he was able to win the 2 more titles, I think it was incredibly meaningful to him. And he did it without Shaq. He did on his own terms. He wound up with 1 more ring than Shaq. So I think really, truly for Kobe, it was a redemption of major proportions.
Colin McVicker asks, how did you become an author of sports, and who was your favorite NBA player? Those are 2 kind of separate questions, but I guess tackling the first one, how did you decide after your cross country career was over that you were going to be an author and a writer?
Well, I always wanted to be a sports writer for a long time. And when I was in college at the University of Delaware, I wrote for the student newspaper, The Review, and had a bunch of internships. And I got hired. And my first job was in Nashville, Tennessean, and I was a food and fashion writer for the Tennessean. I was a terribly misplaced food and fashion writer. It was the only job they had open, and I was really bad at it. And I kept making mistakes. Every job I had at the Tennessean, I would make mistakes. And they put me on the police beat. And they said, just go on the police beat. Just worry about facts: who, what, where, when, how, and why. And that was huge for me. And when I was done with that, I got put on the high school wrestling beat. And I was covering high school wrestling for the Tennessean. And I was begging Sports Illustrated for a job. My dream was to write for Sports Illustrated from the time I was a kid, SI. And what happened is, it's a little long, but it's pretty funny. When I was at Delaware, I applied early for the NBA draft just to see what would happen. As a lark, I applied early for the NBA draft. I didn't play college basketball, but I applied. And I got a letter back from the NBA, and they're like, as of this date, you are in the draft. And then I got a call from the head of security saying, basically, who the hell are you? And this whole thing happened, and my name was in the NBA draft pool for 1996. And I wrote about it for my college paper. And basically, I kept applying to Sports Illustrated, and they asked me to pitch some story ideas. So I pitched a few boring ones, and I said, well, back when I was in college, I applied for the NBA draft. And they said, write that. And I wrote that as a freelance piece. It was my first story to appear in SI, and I was hired by the magazine a bunch of months later. And that really began my career as a sports writer.
No, it's a great story.
My favorite NBA player.
And
I grew up a pretty diehard Nets fan, New Jersey Nets fan.
Wait, I'm going to guess then. Ray Richardson.
No, Pearl Washington.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a great one.
He didn't have a good NBA career, but I loved him at Syracuse.
No, but man, what a player at Syracuse. I mean, you can't be a better college player in the whole New York. I mean, even though it's Syracuse, like I'm the same era as you, and that's that's definitely the guy. That's love the man. Yeah. So would you say that you were either a Kobe guy or a Shaq guy? Because as you say in Ring Circus, everybody had to be either a Shaq guy or a Kobe guy. You were neither one for you coming into this? No,
because I really looked at it from an outsider's perspective. Like I was not covering the team. When you covered the team, you generally had to be one or the other. Like those guys were going to confide in you, but they weren't going to both confide in you. So you had to pick your person. So coming in, I honestly came in with a complete open mind. I didn't even know that much intricacy wise about them. So I just went into it. I didn't have a guy or a preference.
We have another good fan question. Lisa Serrano asking, who was your favorite person to write about, and who did you learn the most about in when you wrote about them?
Yeah, I feel like I assume she's talking about this book. I mean, my favorite sort of person to deal with, just because it was so weird. The Lakers had a guard named J.R. Ryder for 1 year. You remember J.R. Ryder?
I do, yes.
Former slam dunk champion, got in a lot of trouble through the years. Super smart, but kind of bothered. And I didn't have a phone number for J.R. Ryder, but I had an address. So I drove out to his house in Arizona. I was in Arizona anyway, so I drove to his house. And I get there and I knock on the door. Journalists, you knock on doors every now and then. It's just part of the biz. I knock on the door, and a little kid answers, and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for J.R. Ryder. And it's like, hold on. And then a woman comes to the door, and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for J.R. Ryder. And she goes back, and I hear some arguing behind the door. And then there's J.R. Ryder. He does not look happy. And he's like, who are you? I'm like, oh, my name's Jeff Pearlman. I'm a writer. Bro, what? Bro, no, bro, no. You did not just walk up and did you just walk up on my house? Bro, are you kidding? And he's in my face, and he's really pissed off. And he's basically like, so what are you writing about? And I'm like, oh, I'm doing a book about the Shaq Kobe era, the Lakers and Phil, and you were there, obviously. All right, man, I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you. Okay. And we ended up talking for 2 hours. We did on the phone, and he was awesome. So that whole experience, and he was great. He was really insightful and really great. So I would oddly list the sort of obscure in Laker history J.R. Ryder as my favorite guy from that period. Weird as it is.
I mean, the chase stories are great. I know you have some great ones from when you wrote the USFL book on chasing those guys down 30 years later. And a lot of those guys were people who no one had heard of even then, and then 30 years later. But in addition to the great chase stories, that I think in your books, there's all these side stories that you only get from those kinds of interviews.
Mhm.
Who were some of the other interviews for this book that gave you great stuff? Maybe they were unexpected. Maybe they were the bigger names.
Well, I mean, Phil Jackson was amazing. I spent 8 hours in Montana with Phil Jackson driving around a lake, and he was awesome, just really insightful and helpful and smart and everything you would think. Shaq was great. I flew to Atlanta and met with Shaq. Thing I remember about Shaq that was really interesting is he was drinking a soda, and his hand is so enormous that it was like my daughter did my nails. It's like his hand made the soda can look like this. Like it was ridiculous. It was like this weird optical illusion where his hand was that big. But he was great, and he was open, and he talked about absolutely everything. And then I'm really into like fringe guys. Like I'm really into fringe guys. Like Kobe was in summer league in 97. And one of the guys on that summer league team was Jimmy King, who had been one of the Fab Five in Michigan. Great. Couldn't have been better. Like Kobe went out of his way to destroy Jimmy King, and Jimmy King was great about it, talking about it. And Mike Penberthy's of the world, and Rick Fox and Glenn Rice. And I just had a lot of really fun interviews with forget basketball, like genuinely nice and decent people who are happy to talk about their careers. Jim Clemens, the assistant coach, I met him at a diner in LA. Just couldn't have been a nicer human being, you know?
Penberthy, who did you compare Penberthy to in the book? I forget.
Well, he actually had to, heading into the 2001 finals, they gave him the job of being Allen Iverson. So
Right.
During practices, it was him and Tyronn Lue were the two guys who were like the little guards. And he said it was the most fun he's ever had because all he had to do was shoot and drive and make these crazy passes. And so his job was to basically be the tackling dummy. That was Allen Iverson. So he loved that.
So one thing about your books, and if you were writing a story about the Shaq with the soda can, you would say it's a Coke, or you would be very specific.
Sure.
You'd say which room numbers in the hotel, like you say what street the practice facility is on in El Segundo. Why are those important? Those details that others might say, just it was the practice facility, or he had a soda. Like, why are those important to include in a book?
Well, I had a moment when I was working on I wrote a book about Walter Payton, his biography.
It's excellent, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. He lost his Super Bowl ring. He was coaching a JV basketball team in suburban Illinois, gave his Super Bowl ring to a player for the weekend and said, "I trust you." It was a lecture about trust. You take my ring for the weekend. The kid actually lost the ring. Well, years later, there was a kid at, I think, Purdue University who had this couch, and his dog was digging under the couch, and he found the Super Bowl ring. The couch had been at a party the kid had had years earlier, and the ring fell in a crevice in the couch, and it was in the couch. And years later at Purdue University, the dog's digging, and this is Walter Payton is dead already. Walter Payton died, and this dog finds the ring. The dog's name was Bailey, right? I just think that's really important. I think it adds texture and context and sense of place and puts a picture in your mind. It's the same thing with the soda. It's the same thing with a bottle of whatever. It's Shaq's hand side, all that size, all that stuff puts the reader as best you can in the place. So that's why I think it's important.
And another distinguishing factor, I think in your writing is that you're going to write what you see. And I don't think you pull punches. And I think if it ruffles feathers, it ruffles feathers. Think back. Well, I think the Payton biography is an excellent example of that. You have a lot of stuff in there that people who revere Walter Payton might have not wanted to see written, the John Rocker story. Has anyone read any excerpts, or has anyone involved in Three Ring Circus seen the book and given you any feedback? Gabrielle Carteris, maybe?
Oh, no. Well done on that one. I have a good friend who was on 90210, and
I have to interview her in a couple weeks, so we can't talk bad.
Oh, really?
Yes, we're going to have a panel with her and a couple others.
A couple from 90210?
Yeah, we haven't set the date yet, but I'll let you know.
I'm good friends with Matthew Lawrence. He was David Silver's dad.
We need to add him in. I don't think he's on our schedule right now.
Great guy.
I want to add him in. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. So, wait, what was the question?
The question was, has anyone read any of the excerpts and given you any feedback, positive or negative?
one player has read it, and he's someone I kind of got to know, and he's read it, and he was nervous. Like, he read it and he was nervous because he's one of the many people who spoke about Kobe when Kobe was alive, and it all feels different. It just feels different criticizing someone or having. Is that J.R. Reid in the background?
It is. Yes, I meant to flip to it when you were talking about it.
Amazing. Well done. How many people even remember J.R. Reid was a Laker?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
But it was, he read it and he was really nervous. Like, he was nervous. He was like, God, I hate how this comes off. Not he said, he actually told me, he's like, this book is amazing. I haven't been able to put it down. You did a great job, blah, blah, but I am really nervous about my name being attached to these words. And I get it. Like, I actually get it. It's interesting because we opened this by talking about when a protagonist dies when you're writing a book, and it's uncharted territory in a lot of ways. Like, I was trying to think of when that happened ever. When has that ever happened before? And I don't know, certainly not in my career. So it's uncharted. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know how people are going to feel. It's just different.
How has it changed how you're approaching the promotion? I mean, obviously COVID has changed how anyone's changing promotions of a book, but how specifically the death, how would it be different the way you'd be doing interviews today if he had not?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of interviews I'd be doing live, like going to a studio, and I certainly would probably do a book event or two. Like, one of the highlights for me is always doing a book event in my hometown, like bookstore, Barnes and Noble, near New Rochelle, where I lived for all those years. And I love that. Like, I love that. I love, it sounds corny, but I love my parents being able to come to an event, and like to see their pride and all that stuff. It's dumb, but and so I don't have that. It feels like one of our cousins recently had his bar mitzvah and he had to do it online. He had to do it on Zoom. That sucks. You work hard for something and you don't really get to enjoy the fruits. That's how. It's not the same. I still am happy to be doing these things. I'm happy I'm able to talk about these things. I do miss going places. It makes me a little sad.
Another good fan question we just got, and I just lost it, and I just found it again. Pumpkin Pie Addict asks, is it hard to write on the Lakers knowing there's just so much out there already about them? And when do you know kind of when to stop?
That's a great question. One of the first things I always do when I start researching a book, I don't have it here, but is I'll buy every book written, right? Every book. So Shaq, in and of himself, Shaq wrote a book called Shaq Attack. He did a book with Jackie McMullen. He did a book with Mike Wise. Kobe did Mamba Mentality. Roland Lazenby wrote a great Kobe Bryant biography. Phil Jackson has written about 753 books, including The Last Season, which was a great book. I always build a library of every article I can find, and it winds up being about 10,000 pages, So what can you do, right? I always assume, like, my guiding principle is there was some guy who played summer league with the Lakers. Like, there was a guy, Brian Green from Nevada, who played for the Phoenix Suns summer league team against Kobe. Well, I'm going to call him, and I'm going to call him, and I'm going to call Darrell Wilson, his teammate on the Suns summer league team. And they played in this game that was really important, Kobe's summer league explosion. I'm going to call them. I'm going to call Jimmy King, who was on the summer league team. And Jimmy King is going to say to me, you know who you need to talk to? You need to talk to this guy. And then they're going to be like, have you talked to the ball boy, Jed? Because he really had a good relationship with Shaq. You should call him. And it's just like, most of those books are from the perspectives of the stars, right? It's just from the perspectives of when Kobe Bryant releases Mamba Mentality, that is what he wants to put out into the universe. When Shaq releases his book, it's what he wants to put out. And people haven't asked Mike Penberthy, and Rick Fox has never written a book. And Robert Ory's never written a book. And all these guys have never written books. J.R. Ryder, no one's knocked on his door. So I'm going to knock on his door. And they were all there too. They had the same seats that these guys did. They just had different experiences and different perspectives. So my basic philosophy is find everyone. Just find absolutely everyone. So that's what I try to do.
So I'm sure you read all the books. You also watched all the movies.
Oh yeah.
What's
the best
Shaq movie? What's the best Shaq movie? Is there a best Shaq movie?
Frank DeFord once had a book. It'd be very politically incorrect now, but it was called The World's Tallest Midget. I feel like looking for Shaq's best movie is like, It's got to be Blue Chips.
Blue Chips, and it's not. Yes, Blue Chips probably because
He didn't star in Blue Chips. I mean, he was a co-star. Blue Chip, compared to the other two movies,
really a good movie.
No, it's not a good movie, but it is basically like Shawshank compared to Kazam. I mean, Kazam is the worst. Kazam is. I watched it. My son and I, we did a Shaq movie marathon when I was working this book.
There's a whole Kazam chapter, which
yes.
I think is great because you talk about how he's, it's kind of the beginning of the Shaq needs to do everything but play basketball time in his career, right?
Yes. And it's not that he's terrible on screen. He's not. Like, I remember Brett Favre did There's Something About Mary. One of my favorite lines in that Brett Favre, I wrote Brett Favre's book, is Biography of Brett Favre, is someone said to him, God, you were really bad. One of his teammates, God, you were terrible and There's Something About Mary. And he goes, how many movies have you sucked in?
Yeah.
Which is a great comeback, And I don't think Shaq's nearly as wooden. He's not as Brett Favre was in movies, but the two movies themselves were so terrible. And the writing, I mean, I don't like criticizing other writing, but the writing was not great in those movies. And they just gave him the least he could mess up, I guess. Kazam, I mean, it's worth seeing because it's preposterously bad. It's so bad. It's like really bad. But he was great on the set, and he was great to the other actors, and the backstories were. Kazam stars him and a young kid, and he would go after filming. He would go back to the young kid's house, and they play Xbox or PlayStation and order Kentucky Fried Chicken and sit there playing video games. I mean, he couldn't have been a nicer person on those sets. He had no ego about it whatsoever. He was just great.
So another nice great question.
A very good job with that picture. Nice work.
Yes, we got to get Kazam in there. We can't talk about Shaquille O'Neal and not talk about the movie era.
Yep.
Maybe we'll get to, if we
movie
have time,
era.
We'll get to the rap era, but we'll move past it. So we've talked mostly about basketball, obviously a little bit of football. Joe Rizzo Baseball, though, has a question. He'd love to hear how you assess the athletes in different sports in terms of their cooperation in dealing with the media. How are baseball guys different from basketball, different from hockey and football? I mean, you've dealt with them all.
Yeah.
And how is that different when you go and when you have to deal with someone in one of those sports?
Love that question. I have a ranking in my head. The most difficult are baseball. I covered baseball at Sports Illustrated. I have many good memories of covering baseball. Many good friends who played baseball. Baseball players are the hardest, though. It's just hard. I think part of that is because there's a culture now where the clubhouses, you still get the most access in baseball. The clubhouses are open forever, and ball players are always hiding from the media. So it kind of has built up a little bit of an acrimonious relationship to a certain degree. Football players are second, but football players generally are pretty good. You just don't get, it's the opposite. You get almost no access to football players. NBA, I've always loved covering basketball players. This sounds dumb, but like they've mostly been to college. It's a smaller group of players. They're usually pretty accessible. And
even this one?
Hey, if you could get him, he's great. Like he's crazy, but he's great. Actually, crazy is the wrong word because he probably has mental health issues. He was eccentric. And then everyone loves covering hockey. You never hear bad stories about hockey. They always say that Canadian farm boys are always just happy to talk. So I would say hockey is every sports writer's number one sport as far as access and ease with the players. Yeah, nice route and shot. It's good.
Lisa Serrano has another question. She'd like to ask past or present, living or dead, who would you love to interview and why? And you don't have to stay in the sports realm for that if you don't want to.
I was asked this the other day. I have two people. One of my favorite books of all time, my daughter recently read it, was the Autobiography of Malcolm X, which is an incredible book and really fascinating. And I would love to sit down and interview that guy. He was really interesting. And the other, and this is weird because I'm a pretty liberal guy actually, is Gerald Ford is one of my all-time heroes. I just thought the decency and the class and the dignity he brought to it all and the courage when he pardoned Nixon, and he was destroyed for pardoning Nixon, but his priority was the country and the country moving past. I always thought what a heroic and, unique sort of individual. And if I had to interview one athlete, I would love to go back in time. I was a big, when I was a kid growing up, one of my favorite players was a guy named Gary Templeton, and shortstop, Padres, Cardinals. And there was a time when he was with the Cardinals when he gave the middle finger to the fans, and Whitey Herzog, the manager, hated him. And I just freaking loved him. I thought he was the biggest badass in baseball. And I would love to I interviewed Gary Templeton like 2003 version when he was very mellow and quiet. I want to go back in time and talk to Gary Templeton, 1979 badass, and talk to that guy.
You know, there is a current interview with him in a book that just came out of the gentleman who goes across the country. Yeah, Wax Pack. And
great book.
It's a great book. And that interview, I mean, Gary Templeton, we think about Gary Templeton and with that incident, and I think people didn't understand what was happening to him at that point and why he did that. And it was beyond just people booing him. But that's another story. But, you know, you talk about interviewing different people and your podcast, Two Writers Slinging Yang, for anyone who either is a writer or likes good writing, the podcast is just great. If you're a fan of writing,
thank you.
Love that. Where did the concept for that come about for you? And how do you get your family to do those ads with you? Which is just
you know, I just love, I love writing. Like I love writing. I do. It's my passion. And I love talking about writing. And I don't make any money off. I don't make a dime off that podcast. It takes time, but I love talking about writing and the opportunity to talk to different writers and talk to my heroes. Like pre-COVID, I went up to LA and sat down with Susan Orlean, who's just a great, great all-time writer, and was able to sit down with her and talk about, I mean, I love that stuff. I'm all in for that. So I just thought that'd be really cool. And my kids, they do the ads, they get no money. They kind of get annoyed. I'm like, Emmett, you want to do an ad? Can you just ask Casey? Casey, you want to do an ad? Yeah, I'll do it. She's more eager than he is. But it's just, you know, it's a family. I like it because I like the idea of looking back and hearing their little voices when I'm what I already hear. My son is going on 14 and I hear his voice changing in the ads. And it kind of makes me sad, but I'm glad I have that captured from time.
You wrote The Bad Guys Won about the 86 Mets, but you wrote it in 2004. I know that tons of people who've read that book love it, love it. I know that you have said that you have improved a lot as a writer since then. If you were writing that today, or if you had the knowledge you had today when you wrote that first book, what's changed for you in the way you write a book from 2004 to 15 years later?
Well, you know what's funny is I actually think, I was thinking about this after I said that one time. I feel like maybe I would butcher that book if I were doing it now. Like, I think part of it was the naive first-time book guy that actually maybe made it work. Like, I like delving into guys' backgrounds more. Like, I didn't delve into backgrounds that well in that book as far as Keith Hernandez's journey or Ron Darling's journey. But maybe that's good. Maybe that's actually better for that book. And maybe I would screw it up by going to people. Of all the books I've written, that's the one that feels like it has at least a little bit like a following. Like Met fans will always be like, oh, the bad guys won. I've walked up into Citi Field and the people working when I have to get my press pass, they're like, you're Jeff Pearlman? Bad guys, man, great. Like with Met fans, it has a little niche thing, you know? And I think part of that is because I just wrote it at the right time. I was a little naive. I wrote it at a very fast pace. The book is a fast kind of read, I guess. And maybe I'd screw that up now because now I report much more in the books than I did then, you know? So, but maybe that one didn't call for that. Maybe that book was supposed to be what it was, which is kind of quick and fast and sleek and whatever. So I don't know. I'm more of a reporter now, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a Mavericks fan. I hate the Lakers, but I love this book. I'm a Yankees fan. I hate the Mets, but I love that book. I'm a Packers fan, right? So I hate the Bears, but I loved Walter Payton's book.
I gave you Gunslinger, man. I gave you Gunslinger.
I loved Gunslinger. I loved Gunslinger.
I gave you Gunslinger. That was for you.
I don't love Brett Favre so much. I love Gunslinger. Yeah. But so to me, same thing with this is I've been interested in this book for a while because you've been talking about it and because you wrote it, obviously, and you know anything you write, I'm probably going to be really interested in. But I think for folks who look at this and go, oh, I'm not a Lakers fan, I'm not going to like this, or I'm not a basketball fan, I'm not going to like this, what would you say to them that's present in this book that they're still going to like it, even if they're not a Lakers fan or a big basketball fan?
Well, first I would say if you like, my mom has never read any of my books. She just doesn't. She's a very supportive mom. She's a great mom. She'll skim, blah, 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 but she's never done a deep dive. She doesn't care about sports. I'll just be honest, actually. In fact, I'll say the unsexy answer. If you're not a sports fan, maybe you shouldn't read the book. Like, there are a lot of great books out there. I'm certainly not the only guy whose books you should read. There are a lot of great books out there. That's not, my publisher would not like that answer. But like, the thing I do like, especially especially with the Shaq Kobe sort of thing, is there is a real interesting take on human dynamics and these two guys who really didn't like each other still working together for a greater good and a common cause, and sort of the positive of that, the negatives of that, the toll that takes on people. I do find the human dynamics really interesting. So, I don't know, but if you're not, I can't tell a guy who doesn't like basketball at all to read this book. I mean, that'd be a little, I don't need your money that badly. I mean, I read something you love, man. There's so many great books out right now. Like, I cannot speak highly enough of all the great authors out there. And, there are a lot of choices out there.
That's a great way
Do not show my publisher that answer.
We can always delete the end of this off. When you share this with them, just go ahead and we can stop at the last question. But
that's all right. Rather have integrity.
Ring Circus. The author is the great Jeff Pearlman. He's spent a lot of time with us today. And I know you've got a lot going on. Appreciate you taking time with us, and good luck with this. I know it's a tough time to have a book come out, but if there is a basketball fan group out there that wants to delve into something, this is the one to read.
Thank you so much. And also, I just want to say, if you go to my Twitter feed, I answer every question. So if you're reading the book and you have any questions you want to answer, I'm always happy to answer. Whether you hate the book or like the book or whatever, just hit me up. I'm happy to talk. So
he's Jeff Pearlman. I'm Jerry Milani. I appreciate you being with us today on Wizard World Virtual Experiences, and hopefully we'll check it out on a future broadcast. Thanks so much.